Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today, I will be interviewing the Martha Stewart of horror, Kaci Hansen. You all know her as the Homicidal Homemaker. And today, we'll be talking about all those ghoulishly clever recipes that she makes on her cooking show / cooking videos on Rue Morgue TV / YouTube, and it's going to be pretty cool. I've met Kaci a bunch of times at Sinister Creature Con in Sacramento. That's one of the main conventions that she goes to in the world of horror. And it's going to be pretty cool, as I said. She's really cool, and been trying to get her on the podcast for a while now, and her schedule has been super busy, but now it has opened up. So yeah, here is my interview with Kaci Hansen. Hi, Kaci.
Hi, Tommy. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for asking.
Oh, my pleasure. We're finally doing this.
Yeah. Thought it could work out finally.
Yes. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Of course.
Oh, boy. So going back to the beginning, did you fall in love with horror early on?
In all honesty, no. My parents were horror fans. I always had a fondness of things with a darker aesthetic, like the Addams Family and the Monsters, because I would watch those at my great-grandparents' house. But as for horror movies, they legitimately scared me at a very young age. And one of my earliest memories is my parents showing me the original The Fly and then sending me to bed. And every time I would shut my eyes, I would just hear, help me, help me. And I was so freaked out.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I was even scared of like Michael Jackson's Thriller video.
Yeah.
And I remember that my mom had me watch this documentary. It was like the making of Thriller. And she'd always tell me, oh, why are you scared of that? That looks so fake. And that's kind of where the fascination with horror started. I was very, very scared of it when I was little. And I wanted to know, well, if it wasn't real, then why was it scaring me so much? And so it did start at an early age, but originally I hated horror films. And even, music from like Dark Shadows and Tales from the Dark Side, like the music would even scare me. And so it started off, when I was really, really little, maybe around like age 3 or 4, being so scared. And then as I got a little bit older, that's some of my fondest memories, are watching horror films with my family.
Wow. So The Fly was the first thing you saw?
I don't know if it's the first thing I saw, but it's my earliest memory of seeing a horror film.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first horror film you saw that you liked? When it actually sank in for you?
Probably the original, The Little Shop of Horrors. And I think part of that was because I was a fan of the 80s musical when I was a child. That was actually my first favorite film, was that movie. And so I remember seeing the original version of it, and I really liked it. And now that I'm older, I have much more appreciation for the original one rather than the 80s one. I mean, I love the 80s one still, but I just remember watching, I can't really like pinpoint any other movies that I really, really, really liked when I was little, because I had a tendency to go more towards odd things when I was younger rather than horror. I loved anything that was like Tim Burton. Beetlejuice was, I wouldn't consider that horror, but I do believe it has spooky elements, and I would say that was one of my absolute favorite movies when I was a little kid. Gosh, that's a tough question. I remember watching, and I mean this was when I was a little bit older, but I remember watching Mystery Science Theater 3000 with
Yeah.
my dad, and I still watch that today. I love watching those with my family, and so I did watch a lot of, very bad horror movies through that too.
Mm-hmm. So you were into the more family friendly horror movies.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, even though my parents, I mean, I was a product of the 80s, so
Me too.
slasher films were something that were watched very often, so I wasn't really restricted on what I could see, which is probably not a good thing in some ways. A lot of people, they kind of don't let their children see certain films, but I remember watching, like, all of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, Friday the 13th, Halloween. I remember watching all of those. A lot of those have boobs, a lot of them have a lot of blood, and I remember seeing it all. I remember watching Return of the Living Dead when I was very young.
Me too.
So I would say what might be family friendly to some may not be what my family would consider family friendly.
Yeah. When I was like 2 years old, my parents showed me The Shining, and it scared the shit out of me so bad that they made sure for about, I don't know, 5-6 years after that I didn't see any really, really scary horror films like that. I only got to see for a while. I only got to see like the family friendly mainstream stuff like Ghostbusters, Gremlins, Night of the Comet, stuff like that. And then when I was about 8, I got into Friday the 13th, and then that's when everything like really took off for me with the horror, the slasher films.
Yeah, I would say 80s horror, that would probably be like my favorite. It's nostalgic for me. It reminds me of my childhood. But on the other hand, I did watch a lot of horror movies from the 50s and 60s when I was a child. So in a strange way, those are nostalgic for me too, even though they were from before my time. And yeah, The Shining. Wow, that's a that's a big one to show to a child for their first one. I have a very early memory of that. Just the part where Danny's talking in the mirror, that really didn't sit well with me. It's kind of weird that there's so many other things in the film that have such a great impact, and they're so terrifying, but for some reason that scene is what sticks out to me. The whole mirror scene. Not, Jack going after Wendy, not the twins chopped up in the hallway. And sorry to anyone who's listening that has never seen The Shining. Go change that. Go watch it if I'm spoiling this for you. Because that's a classic for sure. That's one of my favorite films. I never could get tired of that one. But it does, it is very scary. I mean, and even reading, have you read the book?
No, I haven't read the book. I heard it's pretty scary, though.
It's weird because when I was in high school, I remember reading it, and the whole scene with the green room and the lady in the bathtub, the mental image that I conjured up from reading that is so much worse than it is in the film, and it's pretty disgusting in the film. So it was just magical to me that horror could translate to paper and create these images within your mind that are even worse than what you could see on screen. So that is definitely one thing about the horror genre that I think is so fantastic, is it doesn't just stop at movies. There's so many ways that one can be involved with this genre, whether that's writing, whether that's actually creating the monsters. And I think that's just what's so fascinating about it to me.
What are your favorite horror movies?
Oh, that's a tough one because I have so many. I love Night of the Creeps. It's one of my favorite movies. One of my other top favorite movies, the original House on Haunted Hill, The Tingler, Straight Jacket with Joan Crawford. I'm a big William Castle fan, if you can't tell.
Yeah.
I love 80s horror, so I love like the Slumber Party Massacre trilogy, particularly Part 2. I think that's a great gateway horror for people that I'm trying to convert into horror fans. I even love movies that have horror elements that wouldn't necessarily be considered horror, I guess you could say. Like, I don't know. I consider, like, Monster Squad and Gremlins, I still consider those within the horror genre because they do deal with monsters.
Yep.
And there's been a lot of people who argue with me on that. I'm like, you know what? I think the horror genre, whatever you can draw from it and whatever you can make of it, that's the important part. Just find something that you like, and if it brings you joy, then who cares what category or subgenre that it could fall into, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So back to 80s horror, though, I love the stuff. I love the Friday the 13th franchise. I love Nightmare on Elm Street. Favorite Elm Street film, probably Dream Warriors.
Yep.
And that may or may not have to do a lot with Dokken being on the soundtrack, who are one of my favorite bands. But
mine too.
I love Dokken.
Yep.
And gosh, for the Friday the 13th franchise, I would say Jason Takes Manhattan. Even though people say it's bad, I love that one. I think there are some excellent kills in that one. I love the head cam. I love Return of the Living Dead. That's one of my favorite films. Great soundtrack too. I have a lot of fond memories of watching that with friends. I love Hellraiser. Gosh, I could go on and on and on. I especially love films with Vincent Price. I mentioned House on Haunted Hill and The Tingler. Those movies just bring me so much joy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dream Warriors was the first slasher movie I ever saw. It freaked me out as a kid, but it's my favorite of the Freddy series. And then the original Friday the 13th is my favorite slasher movie of all time. Dawn of the Dead, The Stuff, Creep Show, Chopping Mall.
Oh gosh, I love Creep Show and Chopping Mall. I can't believe I didn't mention those. Gosh, Creep Show, that used to scare the daylights out of me, especially the Something to Tide You Over and Father's Day. Like, oh my gosh, those freaked me out. Like, I hated when my parents would put that on because it was so scary to me. But again, that became fascination, and I think one thing about Something to Tide You Over, and this is going to sound so silly, but I think the fact that it was Leslie Nielsen playing like such a bad guy, I think that's what really scared me about it, because I always saw him in like Airplane and like hilarious movies, you know, and
Naked Gun.
Gun. And just seeing him play like this bad guy, I was like, I didn't like it. And then when they come for him, like, I did not like the voices. Like, something about sound really, really like scares me. Like soundtracks and just sound effects, I find that that's very like unnerving for me. And something about their voices, how they sounded so gurgly, and
yeah,
I just didn't like that. And I have a very early memory of my mom telling me, that is so far-fetched, why are you scared of that? The part where Leslie Nielsen buries him on the beach and then puts the TV there, my mom's like, how would a TV run on a beach? Like, he'd have to have a really, really long cord. And so that's kind of one of my early memories of my mom telling me to stop being ridiculous about being so scared of something, is a guy couldn't have a TV on a beach. Now, if it were present day, 2019, I guess that could be possible. But back in the 80s when Creep Show came out, a TV on the beach was a bit far-fetched.
Yeah, Something to Tide You Over is my favorite in the movie. And Stephen King tried to redo it again in Cat's Eye when Robert Hayes is on the ledge of that building and Kenneth McMillan is taunting him. But Something to Tide You Over is a much better story, though, in a much better movie, of course. I also love, there's this movie Charlie Band made in the early 80s that there's not much written about it on the internet, and not many people know it. I've talked to a few people who know it. The Alchemist.
I have not seen that one.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. Oh my God. It's a really freaky black magic movie, and I recommend it. Yeah, it's very underrated.
I'll have to check that one out. I've never heard of that one, and I mean, the little free time that I have,
Mm-hmm.
I spend it, immersed in the horror genre in some way, and whether that's watching TV shows or watching films or, learning about movies, that's what I like to do in my spare time.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the horror genre in recent years has become a little antiquated in terms of originality? Because I think horror just today is just way too serious. There's no humor in it anymore.
Yes and no. I think that I think the age of remakes is, I don't know. I just think it's a little overdone. I always appreciate someone wanting to breathe new life and do a classic, and hopefully bring more recognition to that original film. But on one hand, I feel that they should be trying to do something new. And everyone always says, well, everything's been done already, but that's not true. I mean, you can draw inspiration from something, but put your own twist on it. You don't have to do word for word what somebody did or try to replicate what somebody once did that was a classic. But, and I know it sounds like I'm opposed to remakes, which that probably sounds like very much that I am. And it's not that. It's just that I wish somebody would really, really try. Like, one of the perfect examples, in my opinion, is the Fright Night remake. I didn't think it was necessarily a bad film, but it was not Fright Night, and it did not have the charm that Fright Night did. I think if they kind of drew inspiration from it, and a next door neighbor was a vampire, but they didn't try to replicate the storyline, I think it could have been a little bit more successful. I watched it one time and I never watched it again. So, but I didn't hate it. I didn't hate it, but I just didn't. And I don't know. I guess maybe if one were to see a remake before they saw the original, it would have a different impact on them. But Fright Night, that's another one of my favorite films. It's something I've watched, my whole life.
Right. Me too.
And then I heard that they're going to try to redo The Lost Boys, and I'm like, no, just leave it alone already. But I don't want to say that I feel that there's not as much humor in the horror genre. I think that there's a lot of people that they love this genre so much. They're so immersed in it, and they want to, pay tribute to the things that they've grown up with that have brought them so much joy. So I do think with a lot of indie horror, there's people doing fantastic things. But as for big studios, sometimes, and I'm not saying all the time, I'm just saying sometimes, they may not have, the heart that should go behind it. And I think that's sometimes where it fails. When you get someone who is an avid fan of the horror genre, that shows in their work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I think it's just totally dependent on that. I think that if they get the right people behind the project, and it's someone who's very, very much in love with the genre and what it has to offer, then I think that that there's definitely some great nods to, the nostalgia of 80s slashers, and then sometimes you get a big studio behind it, and it's just a moneymaker for them, and I think it shows.
Mm-hmm. I think once I get my foot in the door and I start making movies and stuff, that I hope it'll change, because I'm all about putting humor into horror, like in the 80s and stuff, and I just miss that. It's so lacking in today's horror. But
yeah, and I think that's a great way too, if there's someone who doesn't consider themselves a horror fan, I always tell people that say that they hate horror films, I said, I bet there is one film that I can get you to watch that you will enjoy. And often I take something from the 80s that has a very laughable set of scenes, and I show it to them. And they start to find an appreciation for it. And, I mean, that's why I started Central Valley Horror Club, 10 years ago in my area in Central California. And that my main goal was to unite other horror fans in the area so we could make friends, but also to introduce people to the genre. And there were people who were like, I'm so scared of movies. You're not going to show The Exorcist. I'm like, no, I'm going to show you something that you may be familiar with, an actor or a director, or you may have heard of it. and maybe I'll show you a sequel, because a lot of people, they had seen, Dawn of the Dead, but they'd never seen Day of the Dead, or they've seen Land of the Dead, but never saw, they'd never seen Dawn of the Dead, things like that, or they've seen Phantasm, but they've never seen Phantasm 2. So I would try to do things like that, show them like lesser known but a little bit recognizable names.
Right.
And when I showed Slumber Party Massacre 2, because as I mentioned earlier, that's kind of like my gateway film for people. And I don't know if you've seen the film, but like the killer, the driller killer, he looks like, this is my best description, he looks like the love child of Andrew Dice Clay and an Elvis impersonator. And his weapon of choice is a guitar with a drill on the end of it, and it's amazing. So it's like I have this thing for like 80s horror that combines horror with rock and roll.
Yeah.
Like, I love that. Like Black Roses, Trick or Treat,
Hard Rock Zombies.
Nightmare. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's like one of my, when people ask me, like, do you have a favorite subgenre? I'm like, is 80s metal meets horror thing? That's kind of like, that's like one of my favorite things. Like if it has a rockin' soundtrack and then it combines that with a great horror film, like, you've got me. I mean, like I mentioned, Dream Warriors, Dawkins on the soundtrack, plus I love Freddy's one-liners, and I like how they took it, even though a lot of Elm Street fans don't really care for that one. I thought it was really like a lot of great fun. I liked how Freddy did this transformation from being genuinely scary on the first one, and then just, I mean, he was a bad guy, but you started to like him a lot in the sequel. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, like anything that has like 80s metal with it, that's a great one. So when I chose Slumber Party Massacre 2 to people, they're like I remember I was in high school. It was probably like my 15th birthday, and I had that on like VHS. I rented it from the store, and I had rented it so many times. This is like right before DVD players were affordable for the everyday consumer. And I got a DVD player for my birthday that year finally. And that was actually the first DVD I ever owned, was Slumber Party Massacre 2. I had to special order it from Borders Bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
But that was actually the first horror film on DVD that I owned. But I remember watching that with my friends, and they were like, Casey, like, what is this? And then by the end, they're like, that was the greatest movie ever. It was so awesomely bad. And what's really funny is years later, like maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, Scream Factory had released a Blu-ray set of the Slumber Party Massacre films. And one of my best friends who was at that birthday party, he actually got that for me for my birthday.
Nice. Yeah, I saw the first one on USA Up All Night back in the 90s. I haven't seen the second one yet, though.
It's hilarious.
I'll check it out. So, when did you start cooking and start making horror-related recipes? Was that early on?
No, I wouldn't say early on. I did always help my mom and my great-grandmother out in the kitchen a lot, and that's kind of where I grew a fondness for cooking. I've always kind of been a foodie. I mean, there wasn't a lot that I wouldn't eat. Like, I pretty much would eat everything. I was a good eater as a kid, so I've always loved food. I've always loved good pastries. One of the first things I ever learned how to cook was crepes, which is kind of, I have trouble with those now, so I don't know how I pulled it off as a child, but I did. And I always just appreciated really good food. But my, how I started getting into like the food artistry and kind of making things look like other things, that was just really from getting too many bad cakes at the bakery. My brother's first birthday cake, and I'm 15 years older than my brother. Mm-hmm. So about age 16, we had picked up a cake from a very high-end bakery that, when I was a child, that's where we got all of my cakes. And when my mom was little, if somebody didn't bake her cake, that's where hers would come from. It was just a really, really good family-owned old-fashioned bakery. But they had sold it, and the new owner did not care that the cakes had declined in quality, not only in taste, but also decoration. And so we got this cake. It was supposed to be Elmo. And I told another podcast I was on, I described it to them that it looked like a really jacked up horrific version of Hellboy now that I think about it. It did not look like Elmo, just this red, like, blob. And they spelled his name wrong on there, and I don't know how they spelled Adam wrong, but they managed to. And then the cake was dry in the middle, and I remember thinking, there's got to be a way that I can, do this myself. And so then his second birthday came around. We went to another bakery. We asked for, like, a camouflage cake because he was really into, like, camo and army stuff. And we get, like, this polka-dotted cake back, and it was so ugly. And I'm like, that's it. I am learning how to decorate cakes myself. And that's, I think I was about 19. Like, I had played around with it a little before and learned how to bake more, bake cakes and start baking more from scratch rather than from mixes. And I just went on, like, websites. Like, I believe it's called Genius Kitchen, but back in the day it was called Recipes Are. They've rebranded a few times, and I would go on, like, allrecipes.com, and I would just look up stuff that sounded good to me. And I realized that with cooking, I could make things that I enjoyed at a fraction of the cost of buying them. I could take out what I didn't like from other people's versions and, put what I do like in there. And that's where the fun came into it. It was like, I was an art major, so it was like taking how I would play with art and play with art supplies, but apply it to food. And I love the science behind it, learning through many trials and errors what works together and how it works together and why. And I would watch a lot of Food Network. And going back to when I was a child, I watched Yan Can Cook and Julia Childs and, like, Bob Ross on PBS all the time. Like, that's when I look back to childhood, that's, like, a good part of it was watching, like, instructional things like that and just learning. And so as I got older, when I was probably about 19 years old, I took one of those cake classes at the craft store, and I just fell in love with it. And I started making things that, looked spooky, like little Halloween cakes all year long. And, my fondness for the spooky side of things crept over into the kitchen and just started affecting everything I did, cookies, cakes, cupcakes. And I wanted to know how I could apply that to other things that were not sweet. How could I apply that to a savory dish or an appetizer? And I always wanted to be that person that brought the grossest looking thing to a Halloween party. And that's kind of how the Homicidal Homemaker started. I acquired a Jell-O brain mold, and back then, you couldn't find those locally. Maybe at the Halloween store, but not always. And so I had to order one offline or online, and I made this Jell-O brain, and I didn't want it to just look like Jell-O in a brain mold. I wanted it to look like gray matter, and I wanted it to have a weird texture. So I started playing around with how I could add things to it and make it look as much like a real brain as I thought it could. And I started posting those photos on MySpace, and people immediately, I know, way back in the day, right?
Yeah.
And people started asking me, how did you make that? Would you share your recipe? And I thought, well, maybe I should start doing that. So I made a little profile called the Homicidal Homemaker, and I would share how I would make things. And I didn't think really anybody would care, but people really started showing interest. And I kind of sat on the idea for a while and just kept it as, like, this little persona on there. And then a few years later, I decided to actually launch a blog and a website with it, and that's kind of where it all started. And I started posting recipe tutorials and things that I did, and immediately people started making them, which really blew me away. And people had this interest on, oh my God, that's disgusting. How did you make that? I want to know how. And so I guess how I became, the person that I am today, it's a combination of just having a love for food and for learning at a young age, and then also just striving to do my best and striving to do better than the last time. That's kind of how I am as an artist. I feel like nothing I ever do is good enough. Right. I know that I can push myself to do better, so that is always what keeps me eager to learn new skills.
Yeah, that's what you got to do as an artist. We all feel that way. We always feel like we can do better when we get through with a project or something. But what I like about you, though, is that during the videos and making the recipes and stuff, you talk so wholesome and so innocent. I can imagine you presenting recipes on those craft cooking shows in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah, there's definitely a nod to that in there. You know, I think that there's something much more unsettling, and I'm not trying to. This sounds probably wrong how it's coming out, but for me, it's more unsettling if there's this perky, cheerful housewife talking about things with undertones of murder and gore, rather than someone, you know, blatantly showing you, like, you know, trying to be all creepy with it. And I thought, you know, that's not how I want to portray myself. And a lot of people don't realize that, like, when they're watching the Homicidal Homemaker, like, you're seeing a good representation of me. It's, while it is a character, it's also not. Like, my whole life is immersed in this genre, and the things that you see, like how I look, that's not a costume. Now I sound like I'm quoting Return of the Living Dead. You think this is a costume? This is a way of life. But it's true. Like, the things that I wear, that's my everyday wardrobe. That's how I do my hair. That's how I do my makeup, the decor. That's stuff that I like. So while you are getting a bit of a character, you are seeing an actual person too. And so for me, it's I don't know. I just feel that I can relate better to people if I'm just more of myself rather than playing more of a character. And yeah, I do make jokes about murder and stuff on the show, about, like, chopping up people and grinding them up and putting them in my freezer.
You have to.
You know, I don't actually do that.
Yeah, oh my God. I like the recipe you made of the stuff. Did you have to get permission from Larry Cohen before that?
No, because I'm not actually. It's inspired by this stuff, and you know, everything you see on the show is original. And we're a very independent, self-produced production. You know, we're about 4 people, and we all wear a lot of hats. But I did see a lot of people sharing it with Larry Cohen, and he I don't know who runs it, but it was an official Larry Cohen page, like, shared it on there. So that was really cool. But
Yeah.
you know, this is my version of things. I'm not you know, trying to capitalize on anyone else's work, but this is how the genre has inspired me and how I can create my art in a different way. You know, not just art, but also make something that other people can make and enjoy, and it's educational for them. And then they've learned from it, and then they can enjoy it afterwards. So that's kind of how I'm thanking all of the greats within the horror genre. You know, this is what they've done for me, and you know, this is what I want to do now that I've been inspired by it, and I want to see other people create it.
Yeah, I've met Larry. He's quite a curmudgeon, and I got one of his stuff cups that he's selling at Monsterpalooza a couple of years ago, and I got it signed by him, Laureen Landon, and then I had Paul Servino last year sign it, and I hope I get to meet Brooke Adams at a convention. I would love for her to sign it too.
Yeah, that'd be incredible. And that recipe was very, very good, by the way. Like, there's been a lot of people who they said that they didn't want to fuss with making the cups, so they just poured it in a pie plate. And someone said, like, this is my favorite pie now. And it's very rich. But it was funny how, like, when I was pouring the mix, how much it really looked like the stuff from the film.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a recipe. I mean, that was actually supposed to be episode number 2 on my show. The reason that I held off is we were going to have a special guest on there, and she was a very big fan of the film. She wasn't involved with it, just a big fan of it, and she wanted to be on an episode, but she had a lot of projects come on board, so we were kind of waiting for time to free up, and it didn't look like she was going to get any more free time in the future, so we finally, after a couple years, just went ahead and went forward with the episode. But I'm really, really glad we waited, because I feel like with each episode we learned so much about production and how to work better with each other, and you know, look at things that we didn't like from the previous episodes and how we can improve on them. And I was so happy with that episode, and it turned out so much better than the original script for it. So I was really glad that it worked out like that in a weird way. Like, a lot of people don't realize, like, when Salvador's in the kitchen eating the stuff and then it sprays out of his mouth onto Evan's face.
Mm-hmm.
That was
yeah.
So originally, how I envisioned it, I but it was obviously just someone holding a hose behind someone's head.
Yeah.
I wanted it to look funny like that, like purposely bad, but it just wasn't working how we wanted it to. So
it was cool though.
You wrapped the can in green tape and then shot it in front of a green screen. So then we isolated that. He enlarged it and then made it look like it came out of Salvador's mouth. So a lot of people don't realize that. And then someone put, like, I showed it to my brother after we had filmed it, and he's like, wait a minute, that's not what we filmed. He's like, how did you guys get it to look like that? Like, he didn't realize what had happened. So, yeah, that was a very big deal for us, that episode.
I think you guys did fine with it. I think it works. Do you film in your kitchen, or do you go to a soundstage?
It's a set at my producer's house. It's his little studio.
Mm-hmm.
And we film in the kitchen scenes there that we've kind of made like a little set there. And then if we have anything extra, it's either filmed outside in a garage, in the living room, at an external location, in front of a green screen. We do different things. Some examples of the green screen, like if you ever see The Neighborhood and I'm looking through the window, like I'm shot in front of a green screen. The Neighborhood is a miniature model. On my review for Ecto Cooler that came out for the Ghostbusters film,
mm-hmm.
when you see the Stay Puft Man walking through the neighborhood, that was a girl that our friend was dating. She was like the tiniest girl ever, and we're like, can you put the Stay Puft Marshmallow costume on? And it was funny because that costume's huge, like it blows up full of air.
Yeah.
And this tiny girl was in it, and it was just so funny. But then when you see him walking through the neighborhood, I mean, that was all shot separately, and then the neighborhood was shot as a miniature model. So a lot of times we're shooting in a garage in front of a green screen, and we're composited in. So a lot of people, they don't even think about when you see a house or when you see the cemetery that a lot of that is actually not real locations.
Oh my God! Yeah, I was looking at sound stages because I'm gonna film a pilot for my own horror movie show next few months, and oh my God, they are expensive. I'll tell you, sound stages. But I found this place in San Francisco that like rents like studio spaces for only like $40. So I'm gonna take advantage of that definitely.
Yeah, I think that you shouldn't have to be restricted by funds. I think that you can always find something that you can make it work, and sound stages are very expensive, and we don't have that. We do this all out of our pockets, and we do it with very little money. We do it on a shoestring budget. We do what we have to do, and I think a lot of people, they don't understand that it's either put a lot of sweat equity into your product or find money and have other people do that. But either way, it's going to take a tremendous amount of work for someone. So I think that you should never feel discouraged if you don't necessarily have the funds to get a big studio and do it all, how someone else may do it. Find what works for you. Start off small.
Right.
Learn and find out how to get better and more productive at what you do, and then grow from there. I mean, we're finding when I look back to like the first episodes I did, we were so incredibly proud of them at the time, and now I look at them and I just see everything that I don't want to say everything I don't like, but I see things that I wish I could have done different on them. And that shows us how we've grown as artists and as filmmakers, and it's good to look back on that too, because a lot of times you feel like you're at a standstill. And for anyone out there listening, don't feel that you have to be restricted because you don't have funds like someone else may have, or you don't have fancy equipment. The important thing is just to get going. You just need that start.
Mm-hmm.
I sat on the idea of a horror cooking show for years and years and years, and I just didn't find the right crew, and I'm glad that it didn't work out. I'm glad all the people I talked to, I wasn't happy with how they wanted to change my vision, and I wasn't going to have that. This was an idea I had, and I wanted people to respect how I saw things, and that's how it worked with Neptune Cinema. So you know, I wrote the episodes out and I had ideas for him, and, you know, he told me, don't worry about, you know, lack of money. Think big. Don't think about a budget. Just think about what you want to do, and then we'll fill in the spaces and figure out how we can make it happen. So that's what we did. And we would love to have a sound stage, and we would love to have all of the fancy stuff that other people do, but we don't. So we make it work how we do on a shoestring budget.
That's exactly what I'm going to do with this show idea that I have. Just think big and not worry about money. It's going to be no budget filmmaking, so to speak. But
you just gotta do research. Like if there's something you want, like there's often props that I want for the show, but they're like $200, and I can't justify buying that and using it for one little 10-second scene. So often we'll get to work, we'll go to the craft store, buy cheap stuff, hot glue, make it happen. Like the Critters episode, that Pop-It, I'd never made a Pop-It in my life. And I made that thing out of cheap discount stuff from the clearance rack at Hobby Lobby, like 25-cent sheets of craft foam, a cheap wood burning tool from Harbor Freight, carpet glue that probably cost $3 from the hardware store, and ping pong balls that I bought in a pack for like $1. Wooden skewers for teeth. I mean, you just have to, like I said, it has to be sweat equity. You either have to, you know, pay someone to do it, or pay somebody who's, you know, done all the work for you, or you just have to put in the time. And I didn't have the funds to buy a puppet, so I made him with cheap stuff, and he was in there for like 10 seconds, and that's all we needed. So, you know, don't, I hope that inspires someone listening to this, that, you know, don't feel that because you don't have funds that you can't do something. I mean, phones take great quality video. Just get started. Just do it, you know? Like, don't think about, because you got to at least practice a little bit before you decide you want to make the commitment to what you're doing. So don't worry about fancy equipment. Just get going, practice, because you're always going to get better with each time you do it. Every episode's going to be better than the last one. Every film is going to be better than the last one you did. Every book you write is going to be better, because you learn. You learn from what you did before. You learn how to be better. You learn how to be more productive. And so don't worry about, oh, I don't have this fancy tool, or I don't have this fancy camera, or I don't have fancy lighting. Just go on, search DIY lighting, how to improve my iPhone video quality. You know, there's a lot of resources online, and they're free. So just get going. Just do something, you know, do something that makes you happy. And, and that's my best advice.
You've been, you do conventions like Sinister Creature Con and stuff. That's how I've found out about you last few years and stuff. Have you gotten to the point now where you feel like a peer in the horror community and not just a fan of these people that you're, like, you know, doing conventions with?
It is kind of strange, because I've attended conventions for so long, and it was kind of weird that when I just started to get my start and what I was doing, I mean, before I had even really, like, launched the Homicidal Homemaker website, like, I had done other things, like I had put on horror-themed events throughout Central California, and I was in, like, a horror-themed dance troupe that I had founded, and I was portrayed in some comic books as a character. They used my likeness for a lot of horror comic books. So when I first got asked to be at a convention, I think it was probably, like, 2008 or 2009, it was kind of weird to be included amongst people that, like, I had watched on films. And I thought, oh, no one's going to care that I'm there. But, you know, the horror community, they're very, very welcoming. They want to hear what you're bringing to the table. So I never had merch or anything. I was just kind of there, like, to promote what I was doing and to promote things. And I would sign posters or prints of, like, the artwork that was my likeness was used for. But it kind of got weird. Like, over the years, like, people started recognizing my name and started wanting me to host, like, costume contests at their horror conventions and do signings and show up. And it is strange to me still that, like, because I always think every time I walk into anything, like, no one's going to know who I am, and they're not going to care. You know, it's just how I am. I just don't expect anyone to recognize me, and it's starting to get really weird. Like, I went to a concert just as an attendee, and I'm looking at, you know, these people taking photos with the bands, and start coming up to me and they're like, "Can I get a photo with you?" And I'm like, "What?" They're like, "I'm a really big fan of your show." And it's just kind of weird, like, to go to somewhere 4 hours from where I live and people recognize me. And then someone on Twitter said, "Oh my gosh, I thought that was you, but I didn't think that you'd be in that area. Oh my gosh, I regret, not saying hi." Or, like, it's strange now. Like, I'll go to cons and there's people that are fans of movies that I've watched and they've seen episodes of my show and they know who I am from it. And that's like super, super weird to me. It's cool. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's just weird because I'll see people and, like, I know who they are because I've watched their films for 30 years. And then they come up and they are familiar with something that I've done, or they're like, "Oh, I've seen that. People have sent that to me," because they're in a film that I've done a recipe for. And that's just super, it's crazy to me. I go into every convention just thinking that I'm kind of, just an attendee there. I'm just like everybody else. And then people come up and want shirts and want photos, and they just talk about how, like, I've inspired their children to start cooking, and that is, like, the best compliment anyone could ever give me.
Yeah, I feel like I still have a long way to go because, I mean, all the people that I meet that like my podcast, I meet them online, of course, But more like when I go to conventions, I go, I go visit the guests I've had on the podcast, and they're so happy to see me. They welcome me with open arms. But then there's people that, I've met before, and I've asked them to be on the podcast, and they turn me down, and then they, like, kind of go on, like, a power trip, like they don't know who I am and stuff, That shows to me I'm not fully a peer yet, but, it's in the early stages.
And it's hard too, like when guests are at conventions, you're talking all day, and a lot of times you're repeating the same thing that you've repeated to, 50 other people, talking about what you've done, what you're doing. And it is draining. Like, a lot of folks don't realize that when these actors and artists are at conventions, like, they're talking all day, and it's very, very tiring. So sometimes it's definitely not personal that they may not remember. Sometimes their brains probably mush after saying the same thing a zillion times. So, don't ever give up on trying. What they may not have time for then, they might have time for a year later or even 6 months later. You never know, like, with what their schedule is. So it could never hurt to drop off your card again and, let them know that the door's always open if they ever have the time to be on the podcast.
Right. I saw you plenty of times before, we got to do this and stuff.
Yeah.
So are you going to be at Monsterpalooza this year?
Probably not Monsterpalooza. I'm trying to do a few different conventions I've never done before out of state. I decided that this year I was going to invest the money that I normally would invest in California conventions and take that and go to some out-of-state ones and meet some fans that I've never had the opportunity to meet before. But I'll be at Sinister Creature Con shows, and I think those are really the only two that I'm slated to do as a guest. I've kind of missed just going as an attendee, so I kind of did a little bit more of that last year, and that's kind of what I want to do this year, too. I just kind of like going as an attendee and absorbing everything, because when you are a guest and you are a vendor, you pretty much miss out on everything that you want to go see. You're kind of tied down to your table, so that's kind of more what I want to focus on this year.
Mm-hmm. Like Mad Monster Party or Texas Frightmare or something?
Yeah, those are actually two that I'm planning on doing.
Yeah, I plan on doing those in the future and stuff, but I'll definitely be at Monsterpalooza and, of course, Sinister Creature Con, because 3 of my guests will be there that have already been booked. Tuesday night, and Linnea Quigley and Joe Bob Briggs.
I'm so glad that they actually listen to their attendees, because, I don't know, maybe like 3 years ago, they're like, who would you like to see at Sinister Creature Con? And I commented, Joe Bob Briggs, anyone from Twin Peaks, anyone from True Blood. And they've gotten so many people from Twin Peaks, and then they booked Joe Bob. I'm like, thank you for actually listening.
You take suggestions for recipes, don't you?
I do. We have a pretty good schedule lined up, but I always do take recommendations. It's really funny that a lot of times when people do recommend something, I either already have something in the works or I've already filmed something, and I have to kind of play dumb because I don't want to give spoilers out. I'm like, oh yeah, great suggestion. I don't want to say what I've already done or what's to come because I like to keep everything under wraps until it goes up on the channel.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I always love hearing suggestions on what people would like to see.
Oh yeah, I've come up with some pretty good recipes. Scabby bacon bits.
Oh, that's gross. That's awesome.
Pterodactyl toe jam.
Oh,
And belly button goo milkshake.
oh my gosh. Now this sounds like something that might be on Ren and Stimpy.
Yeah, I used to watch Ren and Stimpy back in the day.
Yeah, that show definitely helped mold me into the sick and twisted individual that I am now.
I half of it's the entertainment I watched, and half of it's my parents because I take after them.
Yeah.
Well, Kaci, we've gone into overtime, and this has been so much fun. And I thank you so much again for taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad that it could work out.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll see you at Sister Creature Con this year. And I'll tag you in this when I upload it and all that fun stuff.
Awesome. I look forward to seeing you, and I look forward to hearing it.
Thank you so much, Kaci. Have yourself the most awesome day.
You too. Bye, Tommy.
Okay, bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Kaci Hansen. Ain't she a sweetheart? Thank you so much, Kaci. I'm glad that you are following your dreams, as am I, and we are the young peers of the horror community, and we will persevere and continue to grow in the future. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, add me as a friend on Facebook, join my Tommy Kovac comedian page on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all the time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes!